Boa noite, Angola. Boa noite, África. Bem-vindos a mais uma edição do nosso programa. Começamos hoje com uma notícia triste. Uma notícia que abalou Angola e os angolanos. O passamento físico do ex-presidente José Eduardo dos Santos. Uma figura que marcou a história de Angola e que será sempre lembrado como arquiteto da paz. Um homem de paz que dedicou a sua vida ao serviço dos angolanos e que vai certamente permanecer na história de Angola e de África como um verdadeiro líder que inspirará futuras gerações.
It was a competition between United States and Soviet Union. See? So President Gorbachev came in and said, we cannot do that anymore. We have needs in Soviet Union. So he spoke to President Dos Santos and said, we must end this war. We cannot keep spending all that money. And the United States was the same. We were spending a lot of money for Savimbi and Nita. So we said, let's try to work together to end the war. So the first decision was made between Gorbachev and Bush. Let's work together to try to end the war.
E assim começou-se o processo de negociação que terminou com os acordos de Bicesse.
So I spoke to Dos Santos in Namibia, and Secretary Baker spoke to Savimbi in Kinshasa, and they all agreed that there should be a peace agreement leading to an election, and so that that Portugal should be the mediator. We're negotiating Bicesse, and the government said, we invite you to come to our government. Savimbi, you will be vice president. And Savimbi said, no, I don't want that. I want an election, because I think we can win the election. Because the people believe in me. You know how the politicians talk. And that's the way the negotiations began in 1990, and it terminated in May 1991 with an agreement. And we helped them come to a conclusion which said there would be an election, it would be supervised by the United Nations, and it would be just the winner becomes the government, you see. And so they agreed on that. They signed this agreement in Lisbon in the last week of May 1991.
Em setembro de 1991, José Eduardo dos Santos é recebido pela primeira vez em Washington pelo presidente George Bush.
After they signed the Bicesse agreement, which was May 1991, President Bush invited President Dos Santos to come to the White House, and he came. And the UN organized the elections, helped them organize the elections. And the elections took place very peacefully in 1992, and the results were very clear, but Savimbi refused. He said there was a fraud. The government was cheating. But it was impossible to cheat because the UN was running it.
Exatamente.
It wasn't, the government wasn't running it, the UN was running it. So Savimbi came to me and said, you must denounce this election. I said, no, I cannot denounce the election. You made an agreement that there would be an election with the UN would be in charge. Well, the UN had the election, and I see no reason to denounce the election.
Mesmo depois das eleições tão desejadas pelo líder da UNITA, Jonas Savimbi recusou-se a aceitar os resultados das eleições.
He lost his way in the 1990s and became distracted and took bad advice, as I said.
And then when the election was held, we recognized the result. And Jonas Savimbi said you should not recognize it because it was a fraud. And we said no. It was the election. You wanted this election. You said you were going to fight until you could get an election. We helped you get an election, and we recognize the result, so we're not going to help you anymore. We stopped all relations with UNITA at that point.
Logo após o sinal dado por Washington, José Eduardo dos Santos regressa aos Estados Unidos pela segunda vez, desta vez a convite do presidente Bill Clinton.
Gostaria de dizer que dou as boas-vindas com imensa satisfação ao presidente dos Santos e a sua comitiva aqui a Washington. O presidente tomou medidas corajosas em prol do processo de paz em Angola e achamos que isso é um fator que melhora muito as nossas relações com Angola.
It's obvious that some further things will have to be done in light of the recent ceasefire violations.
Do you think there can be peace?
Outras coisas ainda precisam ser feitas, porque em vista das violações do cessar-fogo, mas nós achamos que o presidente dos Santos é uma figura crítica nesse processo e esperamos com ansiedade poder levar a cabo melhores relações com uma Angola já em paz e reconciliada.
Em primeiro lugar, eu gostaria de agradecer as palavras de boas-vindas do excelente presidente Bill Clinton. Agradecer também pelo amável convite que nos fez para visitar os Estados Unidos nesta altura. Queria aqui reafirmar o nosso engajamento no processo de paz é firme. Faremos tudo para que esse processo seja irreversível. Respondendo à sua pergunta, a paz é possível, a paz já existe. Estamos convencidos com a assistência continuada dos Estados Unidos da América e da comunidade internacional em geral, a paz vai ser consolidada e uma nova página vai ser aberta em Angola.
Durante o processo de estabelecimento das relações diplomáticas entre os dois países, os diplomatas americanos reconheceram o importante papel que jogou José Eduardo dos Santos em todo este processo.
Tudo começou com o presidente dos Santos e também o papel que o presidente dos Santos jogou para criar paz em Angola, acho que foi fundamental e muito importante.
Os diplomatas descreveram ainda José Eduardo dos Santos como sendo um homem de paz.
Well, I would describe him as being a person interested in peace.
Outros, não tão fácil de lidar.
He was effective at some things. He was also for us, very complicated to deal with because we didn't know if he was telling us his final answer. So he was quite reserved. And so we had to try we have an expression in English, reading the tea leaves. We had to understand how to read the tea leaves. And it would depend a lot on who his subordinates were that we talked to. Because some of his subordinates were quite constructive and helpful and others maybe less so. Yeah? Anyway, it was an interesting experience for us and probably for him.
Os diplomatas reconheceram ainda o grande legado que deixou José Eduardo dos Santos.
I think the legacy that President dos Santos will leave behind for your country is that he brought peace and he maintained that peace for many, many years.
Compared to other African countries, I think he did a very good job of maintaining stability. I think he maintained a stable country, and he contributed to stability in the neighboring countries.
When he became president, he's about exactly my age, the same age as I am. He was a young man when he became president. Neto's death was not expected, and all of a sudden he was a young president. It took him a few years to become really in charge. And then he became more and more and more in charge.
And he also was a man of peace. He always was looking to make peace. I remember when President Mobutu of Zaire had a meeting in 1989, he went and he signed the document with Jonas Savimbi. He was always looking for ways to make peace.
Realmente, os diplomatas americanos reconheceram a grande liderança de José Eduardo dos Santos em saber defender com dignamente os interesses de Angola.
But there's no question that former President dos Santos managed to survive many challenges. He survived the challenge of UNITA. He survived the challenge of South Africa. And he managed to navigate between pressures that he faced. And he was a successful survivor of those challenges. I hope that comes across well in Portuguese. A successful survivor of challenges. Challenges from us, pressure from Moscow, pressure from South Africa, pressure from the Cubans, pressure from various people. And he navigated through that and came out at the end. And I'm sure that when he writes his book, It will be a proud book that he writes, I'm sure.
Descanse em paz. Eu passo agora a apresentar o meu painel. Fique em nossa companhia. Estamos de volta e agora com os meus convidados, a quem eu passo a apresentá-los novamente. Está conosco a Christy Pelzel, ela que é analista política. Christy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. E também John Gizzi, ele que é correspondente-chefe da Newsmax na Casa Branca e também vai fazer parte deste painel. John, thank you very much for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Simon Ateba é o correspondente-chefe da Today's News Africa na Casa Branca e também está aqui conosco. Simon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Simon. So let's begin by looking at the passing of former President dos Santos. And I want you all briefly to mention one positive thing that former President dos Santos will be remembered for. So, Christy, I'm starting with you.
President dos Santos was very proud of his peacekeeping efforts, and he wanted to be remembered as an architect of peace. I do think many people will remember him in this capacity. And, you know, how I will remember him as this 37-year-old man who took over this position at a very contentious time, at a very difficult time, complex time, and he was brave enough to do that and had a legacy thereafter. And so I will remember him as someone who was brave and who wanted to be remembered for his peacekeeping capabilities.
Thank you. John.
Transitional is the adjective that comes to mind for me when I think of President dos Santos. He was the pivotal figure in the transition of Angola from the last colony in Africa to a major economic state. Certainly the condition that it's in now, as opposed to what it was in 1974 when the Portuguese released it, is due in large part to the efforts of President dos Santos. I think of him almost as Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of the Congo if he had been able to live a few decades more and guide his country according to the vision that he had.
Thank you. Simon.
Yes, I will personally remember the former President dos Santos as a lover of Angola and a defender of Angola. He was an architect of peace, unity, but above all, he was a man of forgiveness. As you know, he was able to bring the former rebels to join his government and without killing them. And so I see him as a man who was able to unite Angola, build Angola, and make Angola an example in Africa. As you know, in many countries in Africa, you have division, tribalism, and different things. But in Angola, we don't really seem to have that. We see all Angolan, you know, love one another. They have their differences, but you can see a country that is united. And that's thanks to the former President dos Santos.
Exactly. And of course, we will all remember him by all this good work that he did for all of us, Angolan. So let's move on to our next topic. We will be discussing about Angolan's economy, which have amazing future, futuro brilhante pela frente. Recently, President Joe Biden and the G7 announced the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment that will be benefiting African countries. $2 billion of this investment is for Angola. John, what do you make of that?
Well, I think this is a blessing, a seal of approval for the efforts of President Lorenzo to have a more market-based economy and greater freedom in the private sector. Look, if the airline, TAG, as well as the diamond and oil companies were still under state control, I doubt that an investment like this would be occurring, particularly when the US dollar is in the condition it is. But because they are privatized and because Angola moves toward a market-based economy, one is seeing US investment. In effect, Angola is open for business.
Simon, President Biden emphasized many times about this investment for Angola. What this can represent for Angola?
Yes, I agree with John that this means Angola is open for business. It's not just this investment. You already have other U.S. investment, AfriCell, for instance, in Angola. And now you have two U.S. companies, Sun Africa and Africa Global. Of course, with the support of the U.S. Department of Chamber of Commerce and other entities. But this means that Angola is able to attract foreign investors. And in doing that, it means that the Angolan economy is getting stronger. More people are likely to have jobs, and Angola is likely to be transformed. So this is a good step. I know I keep saying the same thing. All these steps means that Angola is headed in the right direction when it comes to business, when it comes to the economy, and when it comes to other areas.
Christy, this type of investment will be direct for the private sector, which can, of course, strengthen the private sector of Angola and other African countries that will be benefiting from. So how Angola should be looking at this investment from the G7?
Sure. Well, I pulled up the fact sheet from the White House earlier, and it lays out what the project will include. So we have solar mini grids, solar cabins with telecommunication capabilities, and home power kits. So just imagine all of the things that could power. Imagine how that will translate into homes, businesses, everything from cell phone to office buildings and beyond. So it's a real opportunity for the Angolan economy to continue to strengthen and to have the resources that they need to continue to increase power. People getting power, being able to turn the light switch on and keep their phones charged, and all those things are extremely important. And so this will help grow that.
John, do you think that this investment of $2 billion coming from the G7, or specifically from the United States, have any downside?
No, I can't see that. I think as long as President Lorenzo remains in power and has the administration that over which he presides, then the money will be managed and accounted for, very much like the IMF loan to Angola a few years ago. So I do not see a downside unless there is a change of government, and it would have to be a very dramatic change of government.
For American companies to do business in any country around the world, they need transparency. They need to see that that particular government is willing to fight corruption, which is what is happening in Angola. You have transparency, you have a government willing to fight corruption, but also you have a government that makes it easy or easier for companies to come in. And when we say that a country is open for business, it means that I can come to your country, it's transparent, it's easy for me to do business. It's not more difficult to do business. And we are seeing these things in Angola with this $2 billion investment from these two American companies with the support of the US. So that's how I see it. I see that Angola is open for business. Angola is able to attract foreign investment, but it also means that Angola has put in place the conducive environment that is needed for that investment to come in, which is transparency, fight against corruption, and I think transparency is the big one among them.
Thank you, Simon. So let's now see how some economists are evaluating this G7 investment in Africa. Let's take a look.
The G7 countries, the West, they have been trying to come up with a response that was as big as the Chinese investment vehicle. And for the first time, we have a program this partnership for global infrastructure and investment. The size is big enough. It's 600 billion if that money is made available. The scope, the attention, what it's focusing on, renewable energy, building health system, improving the stake of women in the economy. I mean, all of these things are exactly the kinds of things that Africa needs right now. And so I think in terms of its size, in terms of its scope, yes, that's what we're looking for in Africa at the moment. The first thing we have to take into account is that of all the regions in the world, Africa is the one that lags the most in infrastructure. We have less infrastructure. In fact, the World Bank said that over the last 2 decades, road density has actually declined in Africa. So anytime we can get new money coming into infrastructure in Africa, that is good. The second thing is that by emphasizing the private sector, it means that it reduces how much debt governments in Africa have to take to finance the infrastructure because they can get the private sector to pay for it. So whether it's in Angola, Mozambique, Cabo Verde, Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, whatever African country it is, if the government is able to finance its infrastructure more with private sector investment than with the government taking on loan, that is a good thing. The other countries, especially bigger economies, I'm talking about the Angolas of the DRC, we have to do better in terms of matching at least what the South Africans are doing in the quality of our regulatory system. But I should say this, for us in Africa, the future of the world is African. There is no question about that, right? Between now and 2050, 2 billion people will be added to the global population. Half of that is going to be in Africa alone. Exactly. So we are the future, and we need to begin to prepare for that future. And the best way we can do that is investing in our infrastructure. And I feel like Angola is the example here, because 2 billion of that is going toward our program in Angola. If Angola succeeds and Angola does it well, it opens the door for others to come not only into Angola, but into other African countries.
Sure. Well, I think in some ways Angola is one of the lucky ones because there's a real project that's been announced. You know, in the G7 announcement, there's sort of a handful of countries and projects, and this solar investment in Angola is really, in some ways, a centerpiece for the initiative. So I think there, you know, from an Angolan perspective, yes, by all means, this is. There should be a celebration here. I think for the other countries in the region, they still want to hear more. When will it be our turn? What projects? What approaches and standards will the U.S. and G7 countries use for this initiative?
In your point of view, what seems to be the reason why the United States now is more focused to invest not only in the continent but specific in Angola, and especially with this announcement of the $2 billion?
This is a great question, Hariana, and I think that is a great example for all countries that they want to collaborate with the developed world, right? I think once the countries start to implement reforms and show genuine desire to push the country forward, a lot of money will come in, because at the end of the day, all of this money is investment money, right? And they want to make sure that they put their money in an environment where a return is kind of secure. So Angola, as I said before, and maybe that's due to the drop in oil prices in the past 5 years before the pandemic, they started to conduct a lot of reforms. One, for example, is the law on preventing and combating money laundering, the fiscal responsibility law, and also the privatization law, right? All of these kind of, improve the investment environment in the country. Another, for example, the fiscal regulation was enhanced by the approval of a new financial institution law in May 2021, which has strengthened the resolution powers of the Banco Nacional de Angola, BNA, and includes enhanced corporate governance requirements. And to add to that, the BNA's organic law was amended in 2021 to strengthen its autonomy, which is key for making sure that we have a macroeconomic stability, right? And also a one-stop, BNA also created a one-stop window for investors where they can, set up to improve the business climate. And also, not to mention the floating of the exchange rate, which makes monetary policy more easy for investors to trust the economy. So I think that is the price that Angola's government is receiving as they kind of conducted these painful, to some extent, reforms, but now they're reaping the gains through more investment in the country.
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I think in characterizing the initiative, the White House has emphasized doing things differently, using higher standards in the projects. And I think implicit in that is the notion that the U.S. will be selective in its country partners. So certainly this does say something about U.S. views toward Angola right now. I think it's also meaningful that this is a solar project. I think one of the leading elements of this initiative is that it is intended to be a green initiative. It will be a way in which the U.S. seeks to deliver on its climate finance promises. It is no small signal from the U.S. that this particular project in Angola features prominently in this initiative. That clearly is some mark of endorsement, some measure of confidence coming from the U.S. government that this will be a sound investment.
I don't think that's a decision that the U.S. government made. That's a decision that the U.S. private sector made. And the way private sector makes their decision is, first, can I make a profit? All right? Is this a product that I can provide here and I can be assured that I will be able to make back my money? So if when the U.S. private sector looked at Angola, they looked at all of the places where they could do an investment in solar in Africa, and it's like, you know what? The best possible chance for us to get the returns we want on this project is Angola, and so they picked Angola. So this isn't like the government telling them, oh, go to Angola. No, they have to look at the fundamentals of the economy. They have to look at everything that the country has and decide, listen, this is the best place for us to invest. So look, that's a good thing for Angola. That's a vote of confidence in the Angolan economy and in the Angolan system. At Angola, and you can see clear differences. One of them is that the Angolan economy is slightly more inclusive. I mean, that's the best way to say it, right? Under former President Dos Santos, there was a significant amount of the president's close relatives and people who are close to the president dominating the economy. And under the new president, we're seeing that is not the case anymore. But I think it's important for us to also remember that under President Dos Santos, Angola was the first country in Africa where China did the resource for infrastructure deal. Before that, what would happen? You have a company come into an African country. That company would extract the resources, pay revenue, and expect the government to use the revenue on its people. And so what we're seeing under this new president is the kinds of changes that happens when you introduce fresh ideas, fresh thought, fresh. So again, this is my only advice and my only hope is that people would temper their expectations, because change is not going to, the kind of changes that the new president wants to bring, those changes do not happen overnight, right? And so it's going to take a while for that, but I think the country is on a good path, and as long as the political space remains open, remains competitive, I think Angolans have something to look forward to.
So, John, what do you think about their point of view?
Well, I think the point of view is accurate, and I would simply add to it that given the stability of the Angolan economy and its status as the second largest oil producer in Africa, that what one should remember is there is a strategic value in this as well. Countries in the West are now willing to take a risk on Angola, in part because it just may drive China out and its Chinese influence throughout the continent. So many people from other African countries, South Sudan and Nigeria, have all said that they do not want to do business with China, even though the Chinese are offering. We know that China plays a big role in the Angolan economy, along with the IMF and the G2, or the G20, I should say. This may change it.
Yes, Christy.
Yes, I think that this pledge of the $2 billion is a real opportunity for high-level engagement to grow between the U.S. and Angola, even in places that hasn't been before. This is an opportunity for Angola to build trust and new foreign investment coming out of the U.S. If this goes well, if this project is successful. And, you know, I also think that from a citizen standpoint, you know, this could build trust among citizens as well. Are people able to turn lights on? Are people able to actually bear the fruits of all of that this money is being put into? So that is going to be also really important, but it's a big opportunity for President Lorenzo and his administration to gain trust among citizens as well.
Simon, your view?
Yes, let's not pretend that, you know, American companies have, or the American government has suddenly discovered Angola and now they want to go and invest. They want to make money. They want to make money. These people want to make money. Angola needs infrastructure. Angolans need jobs. But the Angolan government has already put in place, as I said, a conducive environment where people can come in, do the business, have companies, make the investment, make their own money, build an infrastructure, create jobs for the people who are there. But, you know, so the way I'm seeing this, if I want to talk about this investment in terms of China, because for a long time, what African, European, or the Western, the West, the way they were operating with Africa, it was usually through donations. You give money to Africa, we come here, we beg, we are poor, we need money, give us money, and then that money was always, more often than not, stolen. There was no infrastructure built, there was nothing done, and sometimes we had to repay that money when it wasn't a gift and nothing was done. But the way they are doing it now, by not just involving the private sector, not just giving money to an Angolan company, right? It's a partnership between the West and Angolan company in African countries, which means that we have some level of accountability. We have some level of transparency. We have checks and balances, unlike just handing billions of dollars to the government, and then you can't really account for it. And so, but will this be enough to stop China? And I'm saying that is a good step, at least, to compete with China in Africa, because China is already far ahead. They've been doing this for almost 20 years. They've built bridges and roads and seaports and in different places, including in Lagos, where I spent a few years. And so what they are trying to do now, although it's a right step in the right direction, they're trying to catch up. But it's never too late. $600 billion, $200 billion from the US, if the money really comes in. The only challenge with that investment is what analysts were saying was the amount of money that actually goes into infrastructure. It's small. It's not the $600 billion. The amount of, excuse me, the amount of money that actually goes into real infrastructure is not as much. That's why some people are saying that this doesn't go far enough, but it's already a good step in the right direction, having a partnership that can create businesses and money for American companies, for Western companies, but also build the infrastructure for African countries that we need.
John, do you think that African countries should see this now good step from the Western countries towards African countries as a competition between them and China, or they just have to do business with them because Africa needs those infrastructures? And China has been always there, playing an important role. Now the US and the European countries are coming. How the African countries should be seeing all of that?
It's inarguable that China has played a major role in Africa. And of course, the Belt and Road vision is a case in point, a major one. On the other hand, there has always been a complaint, and Simon touched on this, that the United States has backed away from involvement in Africa. I can remember African leaders, including the current president of the African Union, Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, always voicing his disappointment in the Obama administration for not doing enough in Africa, a particularly sensitive point because, of course, President Obama was the first president to be the son of an African immigrant. And yet there is that complaint. It was the same about the Trump administration, not taking a lot of action. Now there can be competition in Africa because the United States is paying attention to the continent. One final point. I mentioned the last two presidents before the current one. George W. Bush is revered in much of Africa because he was involved, particularly in dealing with fighting AIDS. And if a president would take that kind of interest and demonstrate his commitment to Africa, it would be a major sea change. But it's something that this could be the start of.
We will go for a short break, and when we come back, we will look more into the Angolan economy. We will be focused on Sonangol and also this refinery of Cabinda. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back soon. E estamos de volta, vamos dar continuidade à nossa conversa aqui nos estúdios, vamos continuar a olhar para o potencial econômico de Angola, vamos agora olhar para a refinaria de Cabinda, mas antes de entrarmos para este tema, vamos olhar um pouco para aquilo que é o papel que joga a Sonangol em todo este processo da construção da refinaria e, obviamente, na economia de Angola. So we are back. And let's continue our discussion. But as we know, we will talk about the Cabinda refinery. But before we go into that topic, I want to touch base on Sonangol. As we know, this is a very important company for the Angolans. Actually, is very related with all the revenues coming from the oil sector. It was in the past and continue to play an important role. So, Christy, I'm starting with you. What is the role played by Sonangol in the Angolan economy?
The role played is that, like you said, that income is going to be very important. And it's going to translate into people being able to turn on their lights, people being able to access health care in the country and use roads and all of those ways in which those natural resources are supposed to be used to continue to strengthen the economy and keep people healthy and educate people freely and fairly. And so that's a big role that the company has played. And I think that if you look back at the kind of rocky past that the company has had with accountability, and you look at what President Lorenzo is trying to do with it now, and he's trying to take public measures to show that he wants this company to be transparent. He just signed the Extract Industries Transparency Initiative, which is a pretty big deal. They're only the 28th nation and the 57th country in the world to join this. And it's taking a stand and saying, I want this company to work the way it's supposed to, and I want these revenues to be transparent and accountable.
John, clearly, Sonangol has been more transparent. What does this mean for Angola?
Well, what it means is that it's a country in which many more countries can do business in. Quite honestly, countries are leery of investment in nations that don't achieve on the scorecard with Transparency International. They fear that corruption leads to a loss of money, and when it's their money, they get awfully concerned about corruption. And in this case, Angola is taking the right steps toward a long journey of being an international business partner with others. And quite frankly, this may be just a dream, but at a time when Western European and some Eastern European states are breaking their ties with Russia. Just having a country which is a major energy producer and they could turn to could provide the alternative to energy that would get Germany and so many others weaned off the Russian oil resources, and perhaps looking at other countries like Angola.
Do you think since Isabel dos Santos left Sonangol, there have been many transformations in the company?
There obviously has to be. She represented the ancien regime of her father. The whole idea of nepotism and of families controlling businesses, just as her brother does. That was something which was a turnoff to investors around the world. They saw a familiar face with a name that suggested the previous administration, the old way of doing things. Her departure changed this. And I think you will note there'll be greater investment in Senegal with Ms. Dos Santos packing her bags.
Simon, transparency is one of the things that now is part of this company.
In addition to that, in addition to becoming more transparent and more accountable, Sonangol is also focusing on the production of fertilizer. As you know, in June, just last June, they began the construction of a big complex in Zaire province. Am I pronouncing it very well? Zaire province. And that particular plant will be able to produce up to 500,000 tons of fertilizers per year. And during that construction, they will be able to provide up to 3,200 jobs and then more than 1,000 jobs for the maintenance phase. So I will say that when I see the new Sonangol, it's a company that is more transparent, more accountable, and more diverse. As they are moving beyond just the oil sector. They are going into fertilizers, and they are also supervising the new refinery, because that's what you should. We have the transparency part, the accountability part, but they are also involved in the day-to-day construction of the Cabinda refinery, which, as I said, we focus on, refining the product at home, making sure the fuel is affordable to Angolan, is cheap, is good quality, and I would say that the new Sonangol is totally different from what we used to have in the past. And when you talk about oil in Angola, you are talking about Sonangol, the oil company. Now, what is the role of Sonangol? Of course, it employs more than 13,000 people. I mean, the last figure that I had, it employs thousands of people. It provides the big chunk of resources for Angola. It allows Angola to be able to fuel their cars, to be able to do their daily, it allows the country to run. And the good thing now is what Christian John mentioned is, the fact that Angola became, on the 16th of June, a member of the EITI, which is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative.
Through Sonangol.
Through Sonangol. And that initiative, it's big because it's only the 28th country in Africa to join that initiative. What that body does is to ensure that the energy sector is run transparently. So you are not just spending money, stealing money. You are using the money for the Angolan people. Your processes are transparent. People can see, excuse me, people can see how much oil, how much crude you are exporting. Right now, Angola has overtaken Nigeria, exporting almost 1.16 million barrels of oil every day. And according to OPEC, the recent figures,
you know, pretty much passing Nigeria and becoming the first.
Yeah, I know we keep, because Nigeria was the first. For a long time, Nigeria was the largest oil-producing country in Africa for a long time, in such a way that even when Angola became the #1 oil-producing country in Africa, we kept saying Nigeria was still the first. And so Sonangol is an important company in terms of their contribution to the economy, but also it's becoming more important because that big fat cow is now transparent. We know how that company was before. Mired in corruption, people stealing money. You couldn't know how much oil was actually being exported, so many things. But now we are having a company that is now becoming transparent. And I'm not even saying that this company is perfect. You know, because when we keep talking about these African nations or what is happening in Angola, we are not saying that the country is perfect, but we are saying that the steps being taken right now are in the right direction.
So by Sonangol joining this transparency or being more transparent, this could bring a lot benefit from for Angola, don't you think so?
Absolutely, and I also believe that this could be a role model for other businesses. I mentioned earlier the diamond industry, Mbiana and
Indiama.
Indiama, and TAG, the airline, that all industries can march together toward letting the world just look at their books, and if they see that there is nothing untoward, then they can invest in them.
So let's now talk a little bit about the refinery. This is big. This is one of the biggest being built right now in Cabinda. And the company in charge, American company, VFuel, that is building, spoke with me this week, and I want you to take a look on the interview, and then we will, of course, discuss about it.
So we started in April of 21, the construction in our facility in Houston. So we were able to complete the first phase, which is a 30,000 barrel crude distillation unit. We finished that in 11 months. So we were able to test the unit in our facility. We assembled it completely, and we received the delegation. The Minister de Azevedo came and witnessed the factory acceptance test in May, and then we shipped the first shipment 2 weeks later. So we shipped the crude distillation column, and in several weeks we're shipping the balance of the equipment.
If we have to compare the other refineries that you build, like for example in Nigeria and Liberia, how would you describe this one in Cabinda?
This refinery is the largest modular refinery we've done to date. The first phase of 30,000 barrels is the largest crude distillation unit built to date. We're going to do another phase, another 11 months, and build another 30,000 barrels. So ultimately it will be 60,000 barrels producing fuel in Cabinda. Well, we build to U.S. standards, so the same unit that we are sending to Cabinda could be constructed and approved by the U.S. EPA.
Is there any difference between all those refineries that you have built?
The difference in Cabinda, we will be doing jet fuel. We're going to have a product of aviation fuel. That's one that we have not previously done in Nigeria or Liberia. We will also be doing gasoline. So it is more sophisticated. The refinery is extremely efficient. It's scalable, so if we want to make it larger later, we can do that. Refining the crude locally instead of sending it off to Europe or Asia to be refined and bringing products back. Environmentally, it's so much better for everybody to refine locally. The amount of jobs created locally are immense. Energy security for power and fuels, etc. Those will all immediately benefit and impact Cabinda locally.
And what type of products will be refined in this refinery? You said.
Yeah, we'll have LPG, we will have gasoline, we will have kerosene aviation fuel, we will have diesel, and we will have heavy fuel oil.
And the refinery in Nigeria and Liberia, they do the same?
No, they do kerosene for cooking. They do diesel fuel. They produce heavy fuel oil. but they don't do jet fuel or gasoline. Well, the workforce that will both maintain and operate the refinery will be 90% Angolan. So that's the goal. That's always our goal, is to integrate as much local capacity as possible, and that's what will happen. The process of training is basically hands-on, so they need to be on the equipment to operate and learn how to operate it. So it will be in Angola. There'll be some classroom time done at the facility in Cabinda, and the rest, the balance of it, will be in the field when the equipment is installed. The first phase is 30,000 barrels, which is what we have installed right now. The second phase will be another 30,000 barrels. So ultimately 60,000 barrels of crude, Cabinda crude, will be refined there.
So you keep mentioning about first phase. I know that the first phase, part of the equipment is already in Angola, right?
Yeah.
What about the remain part of the equipment, when will be shipped to Angola?
2 weeks.
Oh, in 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's loaded on the vessel in 2 weeks. The capacity of the refinery in total is 60,000 barrels.
Per day?
Per day. The equipment that we shipped in May processes half of that, 30,000. So the next phase, as we call it, will do the next 30,000 barrels. Whose
responsibility is to control the quality management and inspection?
Well, we've worked very closely with Sonangol and Sonaref on the quality throughout the engineering and design phase. We have third-party inspections from SGS who oversee all of the quality from that end. And then as far as operation and maintenance goes, the owner will have a management team, and V-Fuels will also oversee the training of all the local contractors that are hired to operate the refinery.
And which role will play Sonangol in all this process?
So Sonangol obviously maintains quality and standards. They approve all of our design and engineering. And Sonangol's role is really to oversee, to make sure that we are operating at a world-class standard, really. So that's what they've done to date, and they continue to do so and be very supportive of the project. It's been honestly a pleasure to work with Sonangol and Sonaref. Very professional, very diligent, very educated group. It's been great.
So this is big. I'm so happy about this refinery, and one of the things that calls my attention is the capacity. This refinery being built in Cabinda is even bigger than the refinery in the country that used to be the biggest oil producer in Africa. John, your thought on that?
My thoughts on it are, it's far greater than just increasing the output of oil from Angola. The Cabinda refinery will do nothing less than ensure that the Angolans are good stewards of their environment. Right now, when a company itself, a refinery, is dealing with the oil, it saves money and restores confidence much more so than when it is sent out of the country to be refined. This is a major step that is going to please a lot of people who hold the economy and the environment both sacrosanct, and it will be good for Angola in the long run.
Yes. Christy, not only this G7 investment are in the way to Angola, but also this refinery that will be generating many jobs, and of course creating more opportunity for local companies. I can only see like a brighter future in the Angolan economy. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Just last year, Amnesty International was reporting this 5-province protest, and one of the key points of the protest, and their pretty major protest, was unemployment, cost of living. This is a major, and they were in it. One of the province was Cabinda. So, you know, I can imagine that this is kind of in a way answering that call. You know, here comes, you know, your job opportunities. Here comes some economic relief coming your way as we upskill you in this new industry. So I think it's very good. I was reading that there were going to be 1,300 jobs added, And it said on an Angolan government website, mostly local employment. And I wondered what that meant, but I heard him in the interview say it's going to be 90% local employment. So that was really good to hear in the interview, because I didn't have a solid number on that. But this is absolutely good, and in a way it touches on what the local citizens there have been asking for and begging for. It's kind of an answer to that call. So it's really good.
Yes. Simon, do you think with this refinery, Angola will continue to send a positive sign to other African countries to better use their resources coming from the oil sector, especially the oil-producing countries?
Okay, all I can say is that to me, this is like the biggest news in Angola this year. I used to live in Nigeria when Nigeria was the #1 oil-producing country. Nigeria was producing crude, but they didn't have refineries. And so what did they do? They would transport the crude outside Nigeria to refine it, spend a lot of money transporting it outside, and spend a lot of money bringing back the refined product into the country. As a result, those products were almost not affordable to ordinary Nigerian. They were extremely expensive, and the Nigerian government has to pay subsidies. And those subsidies were mired in massive corruption. Billions of dollars spent going to private people. There was a big protest in 2012. And now, even those small refineries that we had in Nigeria, they didn't produce one major thing, Jet A1, which is aviation fuel. And so what did they do? They go to a different country to get fuel for Nigerian planes. But what this refinery in Cabinda will do, let's go through some facts. One, it's about $1 billion project. It's expected to create almost, as Christy said, 1,300 jobs, 90% of them local jobs. So between the construction, the installation, the maintenance, people will have jobs. But the biggest thing is that this refinery will be able to, has a capacity of 60,000, the phase 1 and phase 2, we have a capacity of 60,000 barrels of oil per day, which is big. And they will be able to produce not just aviation fuel, they will produce diesel, gasoline, and others, which even the biggest country in Africa doesn't produce, as I said. And so I'm seeing it as a good step in the right direction. Having this big refinery, instead of taking the crude outside, spending dollars to refine it, wasting billions of dollars per year to refine the oil and bring in the product that people cannot afford because it's now extremely expensive. So I'm seeing that having this big company, this View Fuel, building this refinery, and when it's completed, it will certainly be a good project that will benefit the Angolan people. It will make fuel available, it will make it cheaper, and it's a good step.
Mm-hmm. John, the fact that Angola has been producing oil for decades, but only from the last 5 years, the government is now open to have a refinery, a big one like this one. Is this a positive note from the government?
Absolutely, and it could also be a sign that other industries, the government will open the resources and will create things that make the product more marketable to the rest of the world. So it definitely is a step in the right direction. Most importantly, as I concluded, it's Angolans determining the fate of Angola themselves. Mm-hmm. They are in charge of the refinery and not sending it abroad. They are in turn have their names own the final product.
And as you saw during the interview, he mentioned that Sonangol is actually supervising all the steps that are going on in the construction of this refinery with all the engineers coming from Angola and also on the ground. 90% pretty much are from Angola. This could say something, don't you think so, John?
Yes, absolutely. It's Angola having control over its own product, basically. And he mentioned that. This is a major step in the direction of Angola determining the final product, the finished product, if you will, that it goes out under its name. And so far, it looks like a good one.
Christy, do you want to say something more?
Sure. It's, for me, when I look at this or any of the other projects that Angola is taking part in, the hospitals and everything else, it's really a layered success. So, they do good, in getting the financing, and then they do good in being a good steward of that financing, and then they have good relationships with foreign investment, and then they have transparency. It adds to it because people are going to want to invest in Angola as these layers of success add up. And so this is what they're doing. They're layering and layering and layering and making good decisions that will impact the next good decision.
Thank you all for being with me today. So let's now take a look of what the Angolan community residing in US are saying about Angola. Let's take a look.
Eu sou o Padov Fernandes, proprietário da Cardo Faro Moriv. A minha opinião sobre Angola nos últimos 5 anos, eu diria que o Executivo teve grandes desafios sobre questões políticas e econômicas. Angola, com a fase de recessão, a luta contra a corrupção, a baixa do petróleo, atrasou um bocadinho no processo de desenvolvimento do país. Agora, com a subida dos preços do petróleo, o país tem a capacidade de adquirir mais valores para poder desenvolver a economia. Com relação às eleições que se vão realizar este ano, esperamos que tudo seja da vontade do povo e que sejam pacíficas para o bem da democracia e do nosso país. O futuro de Angola terá grandes desafios na questão política, econômica e cultural. O futuro seria melhor se houvesse união entre todos nós. Precisa-se que haja uma boa equipa na liderança para melhorar a parceria entre governo e empreendedores, para que haja importação, exportação, construções de fábricas para empregabilidade da população, melhorias na educação e na saúde, mas esperamos que o Executivo tenha boas perspectivas para os próximos 5 anos em todos esses aspectos.
Chamo-me Fernandes, sou arquiteto sénior de uma empresa de consultoria aqui nos Estados Unidos da América. Vivo em Houston há 4 anos. Nos últimos 5 anos, eu acho que o governo de Angola enfrentou sérios desafios. Passamos por uma situação em que o preço do barril de petróleo era muito baixo. Vivemos a situação do Covid-19 e tivemos agora a situação pós-invasão da Rússia na Ucrânia, que forçou ao governo a reagir de maneira diferente. O país sofreu transformações importantes que foram difíceis para o povo, mas de certa forma necessárias. Acredito que hoje vivemos uma economia muito mais real do que aquela que se viveu antes do governo anterior e com isso vieram alguns desafios para o povo angolano. Para as eleições que se vão realizar esse ano, espero que sejam pacíficas. Acredito que o nosso processo democrático já não permite que as partes envolvidas não se entendam. Acredito que tem de haver entendimento. Só pode haver um vencedor e é importante que depois das eleições, seja o vencedor quem for, o país esteja por trás desse vencedor e suporte. O governo que vem a seguir terá novos desafios. Um deles, obviamente, é continuar a fazer com que Angola tenha uma economia mais real. Hoje em dia ainda temos muita parte do nosso setor econômico que é subsidiado pelo governo. Acredito que essa é uma parte que vai ser revista. No setor econômico, eu acredito que a nossa economia precisa de favorecer mais o empreendedor. Não necessariamente favorecer, mas criar condições para que esses empreendedores possam funcionar e possam efetivamente resolver o problema do povo. Vivemos um processo em que o governo era o principal agente na resolução dos problemas do povo. Acredito que já não é o momento. Acredito que agora as pessoas, os angolanos em si, vão resolver os seus próprios problemas, só simplesmente necessitam que hajam os mecanismos implementados e as leis têm de funcionar para que eles mesmos possam resolver os seus próprios problemas. No setor social, acredito que deve continuar o investimento que tem sido feito no setor da saúde, no setor da educação. Inaugurou-se muitos hospitais, inaugurou-se escolas. Deve haver agora um investimento no capital humano para que esses hospitais possam continuar a funcionar, que as escolas funcionem, tenham o material necessário para que as nossas crianças consigam continuar a estudar. Expandir o sistema de educação para mais crianças. Acredito que existem ainda muitas crianças fora do sistema de ensino. É um problema que deve ser resolvido no próximo governo. Quanto ao sistema bancário, acredito que o sistema bancário angolano ainda não suporta os empreendedores da maneira que deve ser para uma economia digital e globalizada como é hoje. Não existem os mecanismos necessários para que esses empreendedores possam atingir clientes fora do sistema angolano. Acredito que deve haver uma melhor definição do papel do Estado no sistema bancário. É com isso que eu acho que o próximo governo deve trabalhar em proximidade com o povo angolano, deve-se governar Angola com os angolanos, efetivamente, e deve-se dar mais oportunidade a todos os angolanos para que eles possam participar da governação do próprio país.
E foi assim, mais um programa com os meus convidados. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with me, Simon, Christy, John. I hope to see you next time. And a você, caro telespectador, nós vamos voltar na próxima edição com mais um programa no próximo mês. Este sim, vamos abordar os temas relacionados às eleições gerais que Angola vai realizar já no mês de agosto. Muito obrigada a todos e até a próxima.